Sorry about that awkward cut there. My phone told me that I had used up all my memory, and so I had to delete a bunch of videos and come back. Whatever. We were talking about General Zaroff and his arrival on the scene, and sort of the paradoxical way that he's introduced as both tall and imposing, but also slender, that he's got this white hair, but a black mustache, that he's got this aristocratic look like he's used to being somebody of a high class. So his eyes are both black and bright. He's ambiguous. There's an ambiguity to him. We don't know whether he's good or evil. He seems very pleasant, and he's dressed in evening dress, and he's welcoming, but his mansion is like spiked and gargoyles and, scary. And so he's got a very Dracula feel to him. There's something going on with him. He's also Russian, as we're about to find out. Anyway, let's get back to the story. Ivan is an incredibly strong fellow, remarked the general, but he has the misfortune to be deaf and dumb. A simple fellow, but I'm afraid, like all of his race, a bit savage. Is he Russian? He is a Cossack, said the general, and his smile showed red lips and pointed teeth. So am I. Oh, cool. So he's a Cossack. If you want to look up Cossacks, that's kind of cool. But they're wild horsemen from Russia, sort of half Russian, half Mongolian in their descent, tracing back to Attila the Hun and stuff like that. So he's a Cossack, and he's a bit of a savage, and so is General Zaroff. So there's a clear connection, even though Zaroff seems very polished on the outside. There's something sort of disturbing and savage about him on the inside. You get that when he has pointed teeth. There's another maybe Dracula connection going on. Come, he said. We shouldn't be chatting here. We can talk later. Now you want clothes, food, rest. You shall have them. This is a most restful spot. Ivan had reappeared, and the general spoke to him with lips that moved but gave forth no sound. Follow Ivan, if you please, Mr. Rainsford, said the general. I was about to have my dinner when you came. I'll wait for you. You'll find that my clothes will fit you, I think. This is an indication that they're relatively similar in size. It was a huge beam-ceiling bedroom with a canopied bed big enough for 6 men that Rainsford followed the silent giant. Ivan laid out an evening suit, and Rainsford, as he put it on, noticed that it came from a London tailor who ordinarily cut and sewed for none below the rank of duke. So this tells you that General Zaroff is from the aristocracy. He's from a high rank. He's also Russian, and this is set in the 30s. So if you're like me and you start thinking historically, who is this general? Why is he here in the Caribbean? You start to think about the Russian Revolution, and that maybe he was connected with the Tsar and the aristocracy and fled Russia. Who knows? But we'll get some background from that. I think we're getting little breadcrumbs at this point. The dining room to which Ivan conducted him was in many ways remarkable. There was a medieval magnificence about it. It suggested a baronial hall of feudal times with its oaken panels, its high ceilings, its vast refectory tables, where 20 men could sit down and eat. 20, of course, is 20. A score is 20, so 40 men. Let's see. About the hall were mounted heads of many animals: lions, tigers, elephants, moose, bears, larger or more perfect specimens Rainsford had never seen. At the great table, the general was sitting alone. So we get this Beauty and the Beast sort of moment here, too. Rainsford comes to have dinner with General Zaroff. There's severed heads all over the room. The biggest and the best that Rainsford's ever seen. He's a celebrated hunter. These have got to be impressive specimens indeed. Also, we have all of this language connecting General Zaroff to the aristocracy, like a baronial hall, the hall of a baron, a feudal magnificence. There's all of this stuff going on. Lots of space, but he's alone. He could sit 40 men at this table, but he sits here by himself. You'll have a cocktail, Mr. Rainsford, he suggested. The cocktail was surprisingly good, and Rainsford noted the table appointments were of the finest. The linen, the crystal, the silver, the china. They were eating borscht, the rich red soup with whipped cream so dear to Russian palates. Half apologetically, General Zaroff said, "We do our best to preserve the amenities of civilization here. Please forgive any lapses. We are well off the beaten track, you know. Do you think the champagne has suffered from its long ocean trip? Not in the least, declared Rainsford. He was finding the general a most thoughtful and affable host, a true cosmopolite. So clearly he's cultured. He seems kind, almost like he's a mirror image of Rainsford in some way. But there was one small trait of the general's that made Rainsford uncomfortable. We got a but here. We're creating a juxtaposition, a contrast. Whenever he looked up from his plate, he found the general studying him, appraising him narrowly. Why? As a reader, you want to know. Perhaps, said General Zaroff, you were surprised that I recognized your name? You see, I read all books on hunting published in English, French, and Russian. So he's multilingual. I have but one passion in life, Mr. Rainsford, and that is the hunt. You have some wonderful heads here, said Rainsford as he ate a particularly well-cooked filet mignon. That Cape buffalo is the largest I ever saw. Oh, that fellow, yes, he was a monster. Did he charge you? Hurled me against a tree, said the general. Fractured my skull, but I got the brute. I always thought, said Rainsford, that the Cape buffalo is the most dangerous of all big game. Whoop! Pause. That's the title. The most dangerous of all big game. So that's, what is the most dangerous game? The most dangerous animal to be hunted? According to Rainsford, it's the Cape buffalo. For a moment, the general did not reply. He was smiling his curious, red-lipped smile. Then he said slowly, No, you are wrong, sir. The Cape buffalo is not the most dangerous big game. He sipped his wine. Here, in my preserve on this island, he said in the same slow tone, I hunt more dangerous game. Rainsford expressed his surprise. Is there big game on this island? The general nodded. The biggest. Really? Oh, it isn't here naturally. I keep slipping into a Scottish accent. It's hard to do a Russian accent. Just bear with me. Oh, it isn't here naturally, of course. I have to stock the island. What have you imported, General? Rainsford asked. Tigers? The general smiled. No, he said. Hunting tigers ceased to interest me some years ago. I exhausted their possibilities, you see. No thrill left in tigers, no real danger. I live for danger, Mr. Rainsford. So there's some characterization of General Zaroff. He loves danger. He's interested in the most dangerous game, hunting things that have a chance of killing him. The general took from his pocket a gold cigarette case and offered his guest a long black cigarette with a silver tip. It was perfumed and gave off a smell like incense. We will have some capital hunting, you and I, said the general. I shall be most glad to have your society. But what game? Began Rainsford. I'll tell you, said the general. You will be amused, I know. I think I may say in all modesty that I have done a rare thing. I have invented a new sensation. May I pour you another glass of port? Thank you, General. The general filled both glasses and said, God makes some men poets. Some he makes kings. Some beggars. He made me a hunter. My hand was made for the trigger, my father said. He was a very rich man with 250,000 acres in the Crimea, and he was an ardent sportsman. When I was only 5 years old, he gave me a little gun, specially made in Moscow for me, to shoot sparrows with. When I shot some of his prize turkeys with it, he did not punish me. He complimented me on my marksmanship. When I killed my first bear in the Caucasus, I was 10. My whole life has been one prolonged hunt. That's a metaphor. I went into the army. It was expected of noblemen's sons, and for a time commanded a division of Cossack cavalry. But my real interest was always the hunt. I have hunted every kind of game in every land. It would be impossible for me to tell you how many animals I have killed. So he's a ruthless killer. He's killed so many animals it would be impossible to count them all. This is all characterization on General Zaroff, by the way. Is he a better hunter than Rainsford? I think we're supposed to ask that question. But his whole life has been a prolonged hunt. The general puffed at his cigarette. After the debacle in Russia, that's an allusion to communism and the communist revolution, I'm sure, I left the country, for it was imprudent for an officer of the Tsar to stay there. Many noble Russians lost everything. I, luckily, had invested heavily in American securities, so I never have to open a tea room in Monte Carlo or drive a taxi in Paris. Naturally, I continued to hunt grizzlies in your Rockies, crocodiles in the Ganges, rhinoceroses in East Africa. It was in Africa that the Cape buffalo hit me and laid me up for 6 months. As soon as I recovered, I started for the Amazon to hunt jaguars. Just what Rainsford was doing. Again, there's a similarity in their lives. For I had heard they were unusually cunning. They weren't. The Cossack sighed. They were no match at all for the hunter, with his wits about him and a high-powered rifle. I was bitterly disappointed. I was lying in my tent with a splitting headache. Makes you question, does he have brain damage from the bison? One night when a terrible thought pushed its way into my mind. Hunting was beginning to bore me. And hunting, remember, had been my life. I never heard that in American businessmen. I have heard that in America, businessmen often go to pieces when they give up the business that has been their life. Yes, that's so, said Rainsford. The general smiled. I had no wish to go to pieces, he said. I must do something. Now, mine is an analytical mind, Mr. Rainsford. Doubtless that is why I enjoy the problems of the chase. More characterization. He's an analytical fellow, very much like Rainsford, not affected by emotion, always affected by thought and logic. No doubt, General Zaroff. So, continued the general, I asked myself why the hunt no longer fascinated me. You are much younger than I am, Mr. Rainsford, and have not hunted as much. But you perhaps can guess the answer. What was it? Simply this. Hunting had ceased to be what you call a sporting proposition. It had become too easy. I always got my quarry. Always. There is no greater bore than perfection. The general lit a fresh cigarette. No animal had a chance with me anymore. That is no boast. It is a mathematical certainty. The animal had nothing but its legs and its instinct. Instinct is no match for reason. Maybe that's a thematic statement. We're talking about him hunting. It's got to be a reasoning animal, right? When I thought of this, it was a tragic moment for me, I can tell you. Rainsford leaned across the table, absorbed in what his host was saying. It came to me as an inspiration, what I must do, the general went on. And that was? The general smiled the quiet smile of one who has faced an obstacle and surmounted it with success. I had to invent a new animal to hunt, he said. A new animal? You're joking. Not at all, said the general. I never joke about hunting. There's a character trait that's going to be important going through. He's always serious about hunting. He says it right there. I needed a new animal. I found one. So I bought this island and built this house, and here I do my hunting. The island is perfect for my purposes. There are jungles with a maze of trails in them, hills, swamps, but the animal, General Zaroff. You can tell from this interruption, which Rainsford is famous for doing, he's been doing it throughout the entire story, that Rainsford wants to know what animal Zaroff is hunting. It's fascinating him. He wants this experience as well. Oh, said the general, it supplies me with the most exciting hunting in the world. No other hunting compares with it for an instant. Every day I hunt, and I never grow bored now. But I have a quarry with which I can match my wits. Rainsford